Ensconced within the control cocoon of the hulking machine, protected by multiple layers of angular nanocrystal armor, she felt invulnerable. It had been many years since her duties had called upon her to wear the battlesuit in combat, but the old discipline had returned the instant she'd activated the machine, and its sensors had interfaced with her own nervous system, transforming her into a towering bipedal tank. It has been too long, she thought fiercely. As she neared the city's dome, she cut her thrusters and plunged back towards the spaceport, confident in her armor's durability. She came down hard, pulverizing an enemy warrior under her massive piston-like legs, and sending tremors throughout the ground. Triggering the flamethrower attached to her suit's right arm, she spun around at the waist, washing the dead guard's comrades in a whoosh of arcing fire. Their robes were scorched away in seconds, revealing the misshapen forms beneath. These are not common Goila, Borel judged. A mutant strain, perhaps? She stomped over their charred corpses and fired a fusillade of plasma bolts with her secondary weapon, targeting the guards on the far side of the roof. A squadron of gun drones swept by overhead, their path guided by her battlesuit's tactical system. The ship had carried 80 of the saucer-like machines, and Borel activated them all when she received the seeker signal. Malkaor. That word meant spider, but the code signified a great peril awakened. The protocol for the situation was clear: ensure the ship's safety at all costs. Accordingly, Borel had launched a surprise attack on the port's guards immediately, but they had reacted with uncanny swiftness and a total lack of fear. They fight like machines, Borel observed, as a pair of three-armed deviants broke over and charged towards her. One sported a muscular tentacle, the other a chitinous appendage that ended with a snapping pincer. They were bigger and better armored than the others she had encountered, their heads protected by sealed helmets. "For greatest good!" they hissed, their words slurring as if their mouths weren't shaped for speech. Before Borel could fire, a lanky avian figure sprang past her and raced to meet the mutants with a hooting cry. The fire warrior clicked her tongue with irritation as she recognized the crude carnivore, though she had no idea which of the two it was. She had fought alongside the pair in service to the exalted Kuyahai for many years, yet she still couldn't tell them apart. "The Yesu Kaor forges strange bonds," the Seeker had instructed, "but it is their very strangeness that makes them strong." Borel's suit chimed a warning as something landed on its blocky shoulders. A moment later, the second Kroot vaulted from his perch to join the fray. The carnivores whirled around the mutants in a feral dance, hacking, stabbing, and feinting with their broad-bladed machetes, and then leaping away, always one step ahead of the ungainly mutants. Borel did not doubt the outcome of the contest, but her allies' frivolity irked her. "The Seeker has taught you well," she observed, "but you remain beasts." She felt a twinge of pain as an explosive shell dented her battlesuit's left arm. It was a sympathetic sensation, generated by the suit's cocoon, sharp enough to bind her to the machine, but not enough to distract her. Her sensors pinpointed the aggressor in moments. A sniper crouched on a tower to her left. An evaluation of the enemy's capabilities flashed across her awareness, relayed by her battlesuit's tactical system. The threat was minimal, so she dispatched a pair of drones to eradicate it and continued her advance, leaving the frenzied crew to their game. The last of the guards had taken cover behind a cluster of machinery. Drones buzzed about them, kept at bay by the defenders' disciplined volleys. Borel strode towards their position, pinning them down with a hail of plasma bolts as she approached. When she was in range, she scoured their shelter with fire. "Disharmony pretends dissolution," she decreed. She rotated her battlesuit, scanning the rooftop. The fighting was over. Even the crew had finished their foes. Lo, They were still hacking away at their corpses, jabbering at one another as they tried to make sense of the outlandish victims. The Seeker had forbidden them from eating the dead, but their fascination could not be completely curtailed. "Forward perimeter is secure, Shasray," a voice reported to her transmission link. "Hurl, the leader of the first Guvisa support teams. Something was playing havoc with their communication systems, and the signal was badly distorted." "Confirmed, Guvisa I," Borel replied. "I have 3 dead and 3 more wounded, Shasri. Permission to evacuate them to the ship. Denied. Remain at your post. Bauman is in bad shape. I will dispatch the salvation team to your position." Borel cut the link. "I will dispatch a salvation team to your position." The casualties were significant, but she didn't share Stormlight's sentimentality towards the human auxiliaries. She was more concerned by the number of drones she'd lost. Her strategic display recorded 39 damaged or destroyed. When enemy reinforcements arrived, the situation would rapidly become untenable. She switched her transmitter to long range. "Seeker." Predictably, she was met by howling electronic whines that flooded the channel shortly after the fighting commenced. Coming to a decision, Borel stomped back to the crew. They looked up at their butchery as she loomed over them. "Bad meat," one of them grunted, holding a glistening tentacle. "Evil," its companion added sagely. "Enter the city," Borel commanded. "Find our master." The carnivores exchanged a glance, then sprang up and sprinted away. "It is almost as if they already know where he is," Borel mused. And maybe they did. She had reluctantly accepted the savage's bond with the Seeker was tighter, or perhaps deeper, than her own. Her battlesuit strategic display bleeped as another drone's signature went dark. She frowned as the rest of its squadron followed in rapid succession. Somewhere in the spaceport, the enemy was still active. Borel checked the squadron's last known location and hissed through her teeth. The hangar bay. The truck rumbled along the streets, its headlights boring a tunnel through the gloom. Voyle was driving, with Erzul behind him. If anyone could retrace the outbound journey, it was the squad's pathfinder. The rest of the survivors were crouched in the back, their rifles leveled over their sides. The district was deserted, its citizen slaves presumably banished to their hovels. But an expectant watchfulness pervaded the streets. Every one of the fugitives could sense it, Tau and human alike, but none as keenly as the Seeker. The dissonance here runs deep, Kuyahai reflected. Yet, I have learnt nothing. Voyle sprang the trap. Too soon. But was that really true? The threads of ambivalent fate had woven over Voyle to this tangle. There was no reasoning behind it, for the firmament of reality was blind, but there was a rhythm to it. It was a seeker's path to listen and learn, then tune the composition to serve the greater good, conducting events by intuition alone. And Kuyahai's instincts had urged him to trust the broken Guila. Perhaps Voyle had not sprung the trap too soon, but just in time. "Seeker, a question." The fire warrior crouched beside him began hesitantly. "Speak your mind, Stormlight," Kuyahai urged. "You are quite certain that Porel Adib is dead?" "I could not save her. I could not attempt it." He had seen Adib fall in the fissure, had he even stepped forward to help her, then stopped when he heard the soulless voice booming from the rift, and understood what lay beneath the wrecked car. The risk had been too great. "Her loss will not be without purpose," he promised. "As you say, Seeker." But there was no conviction in Ikuro's voice. Kuyahai could not share the fire warrior's sorrow. Like love, hate, and the myriad other shades of emotion that elevated or degraded his kin, sadness was a concept he had transcended. That was what it meant to be a seeker. "The void within stands vigil against the void without," Kuyahai whispered. Take the right, Erzul instructed as the truck approached another junction. She was always the best of us, Voyle thought. She should have been our Guvisa Oi. Maybe the others would still be alive then. You led them to ruin, the voice agreed. Because you are lost. It hadn't let up throughout the escape, cajoling the moment, then threatening the next, but mostly just wearing him down. The worst part was he needed it now. As I need you, Ulver, to your kindred in the eternal cog, as do your kindred in the eternal cog. Why did you shoot the watchman? Voyle asked Erzul, trying to shut out the blasted tormentor. Back at the manufactory, when I ordered it, why did you obey? Because you are the Guvisa Oi, she answered without hesitation. You trust me? Should I not? Not at all! I'll warn you when to stop, Voyle said seriously. Why did you order it? Erzul asked. Because they're monsters. The Imperium damns everything but itself as a monster, the voice observed. Something that's true. I don't understand, Erzul said. Sometimes the monsters are real. Then you are a monster too, Ulver Voyle. I know it, he spat, remembering the taste of the rotten flesh. What are you? He sensed he shouldn't encourage the entity, but he had to know. A traveler who has become a god in service to a greater god. My children revere me as the Animus Alpha. Why can I hear you? We share the same divine star-spawned seed. Though you are not of my blood, that is why you were invisible to me for so long. Voyle, Erzul said, eyeing him warily, you're not making any sense. What do you want from me? He pressed, ignoring her. I offer you freedom, Ulver. Your masters have deceived you. That's a lie. They are not liberators, but oppressors. They saved me. They gelded you, body and soul. Have you felt any desire save obedience since they took you? It's for the greater good, Voyle muttered, remembering the endless mantras of self-sublimination and the contentment the tranquility wafers brought. Unity. Slavery, the Animus Alpha corrected, and Voyle recognized its truth. The invisible god slipped past his guard. Turn left, Erzul snapped. He turned right. Voyle, what are you? His left hand thrust out and grabbed her hair. Her instincts had always been razor sharp, and she reacted quickly, snatching her combat knife free and swinging it towards him in the same motion. If he'd hesitated even a moment, it might have been enough. But he didn't hesitate. Before the blade could connect, he rammed her face to the dashboard. No! Voyle tried to scream, but he no longer had a mouth. It belonged to the voice now. Boral's burst cannon vented smoke as it spewed plasma bolts at the four-armed abominations infesting the hangar bay. The creatures zigzagged between banks of machinery as they circled her. The sinuous forms hunched into an insect-like scuttle. Their bodies were sheathed in blue chitin that flared in the spines of their joints and along the ridge of their bulbous skulls. In place of jaws, their faces trailed thorn-tipped tentacles that whipped about as the creatures moved. Drones skimmed around the beasts, chattering electronically as they harried them with bursts of plasma, but the machines were falling faster than their prey, their rigid minds confounded by the enemy's erratic movements. Boral hissed as another of the flying discs was yanked from the air and shredded. The beast's claws were improbably strong. Even her battlesuit's armor wouldn't last long against a prolonged attack. There are too many, Boral judged, emulating an abomination with a spurt of fire as it veered towards her. Her flamethrower's ammunition gauge chimed a warning. The weapon had already been running low when she'd entered the hangar and engaged the infiltrators. There had been 7 when she arrived, but more crawled from the ducts lining the walls, arriving faster than she could hold them. She had summoned all her forces, but they had turned up sporadically, never giving the numbers to mount a concerted counterattack. Hurl's Govisa team had been overwhelmed within seconds of their arrival. The drones had fared better because of their mobility, but less than 20 remained now, and the chitinous onslaught hadn't faltered. The battle wouldn't be won. Corvée ou car, Borel transmitted to the flight decks. Withdraw the Whispering Hand immediately. The Concordance must be alerted to this treachery. I cannot abandon the Exalted One, the pilot protested. We must assume he is lost. The ship will be overrun if you delay. Authorization cipher follows. I understand, Chasseret. Signal me when you are aboard. That is not an option. Go. Borel kept the beasts at bay with brief bursts from her flamethrower as the docking clamps disengaged and released the slumbering ship. Before their echoes had faded, the vessel's engines rumbled into life, sending tremendous echoes throughout the chamber. Come then, Borel whispered as her flamethrower ran dry. The tentacled abomination surged forward, vaulting over one another with their eagerness to reach her. She clubbed the first one aside with a clumsy swing of her cannon and rammed her flamethrower into the face of the next, shattering its skull. They were upon her, hissing as they raked at her armor. Within seconds, the battlesuit's damage indicator was flashing red in countless places. She ignored it, knowing there was nothing more to be done. Chanting a mantra of certitude, she stood motionless, waiting. The hangar's massive external doors slid open behind her, unleashing a shriek of void-racked air. A heartbeat later, Borel was wretched into the emptiness beyond, trailing a string of chitinous horrors. As she whirled into the vacuum, she glimpsed the departing glow of the Whispering Hand's engines. The circle closes, she said, and overloaded her battlesuit's power core. For a brief moment, she burned brighter than the engines. I didn't warn Erzul, Boyle thought bitterly, remembering his promise to the Pathfinder. He sat stiffly in his chair, hands steering the truck of their own accord. He couldn't even turn his head to check to see if the woman slumped behind him was still breathing. His comrades hadn't seen the violence that had transpired in the cabin, nor could they know the treachery playing out now. I've betrayed them all. No, you've saved them, Oliver, along with yourself. The voice was his, but the words were not. You lied to me, Boyle accused, struggling to break free. Where are you taking us? You shall all be enlightened, but the ethereal among you is of singular importance. The Seeker? How? What you know, I now know, child. Shame washed over Voyle in a corrosive wave, scouring him of all the hopes and hates he had bedeviled since his long fall began. Finally, all that remained was a bleak yearning for nothingness. It is your shadow to burn, Stormlight had advised. Only you can light the fire. Hesitantly at first, then, with growing conviction, Voyle began to recite the 19th mantra of self-sublimination, the winter that rises within, focused on attaining the state of perfect stillness, conditioning its aspirants to show their breathing and lock their muscles rigid as they purged their minds of desire. Voyle had always been drawn to its oblique words and the ethereal oblivion they offered. Emptiness unwound blinds the light that binds unseen. He repeated this spiraling phrase over and over again, speaking with his mind until his body listened and remembered. Like creeping frost, his grip on the wheel tightened, then froze, locking the truck to its current path. From somewhere far away, he heard his own voice calling to him, wheedling, then reasoning, then railing, becoming even more strident as the road ahead curved, yet the vehicle didn't follow. None of it mattered. None of it was real. But the deceiver was blind to such truths, and in its turmoil, its control frayed. The lapse was brief, but it was enough for Voyle to stamp down on the accelerator. Emptiness unwound. With a roar, the truck leapt forward, its frame rattling as its wheels left the road. Blinds the light. The usurper fled his mind as the building ahead rushed towards the windscreen. That binds unseen. Blood tight! Voyle sighed, closing his eyes. Kuyahai hit the ground hard, his armor absorbing the worst of the impact. He rolled with the fall and swept to his feet. For a moment he stood motionless, gazing inward to assess his body. There was some damage, but nothing significant. And the recent crash, his armor and training had served him well, though he would not welcome a third such incident any time soon. He scanned the surrounding buildings, but saw nobody. Up ahead the wrecked truck was still blazing, its death throes casting a red haze over the street. "Your truth dies with you, Oliver Voyle," Kuyahai said, then turned his attention to the living. Akuro knelt nearby, wrestling with his helmet. Its dome was cracked, and sparks flickered behind its shattered lenses. None of the Govisa lay further along the road. "How will we reach the ship?" Akuro asked, finally tearing his helmet free. "We cannot. It is too late. Either the ship is gone, or it is in the enemy's hands now." "Then vengeance remains," the fire warrior said bitterly, throwing his ruined helmet aside. "Vengeance is immaterial. No, we shall keep to the shadows and learn our enemy's truth." "To what purpose, Seeker?" Akuro rose to his feet unsteadily. His scalp was scorched and bleeding. "To destroy it. It must be done. Of this I am certain. With respect, we are but two. We will find others. I suspect this broken world harbors many secrets, Chassel." Kuyahai followed. Kuyahai allowed himself a ghostly smile, though it passed unseen beneath his helm. "And we are four!" Akuro swung around as a rangy avian figure dropped down beside him, landing in a feral crouch. A moment later, a second one leapt from the roof behind him. "For the greater good!" the crew carnivores growled together. Porel Adib opened her eyes as the door of her chamber opened. A Tau stood in the doorway, a female of the water caste, like herself, but much younger and clad in purple robes. Adib had come to loathe. "So Faisal was not the last of his embassy," Adib observed, rising from her chair. 11 of us remain," the newcomer replied. She shared the malignant vigor that Faisal had projected, though her aura was less pronounced. "I am Por Oi, Bayal. Forverse Faisal was my bonded mate." "His death was difficult," Adib said flatly. "His death served the greatest good." Baal had said without a trace of sorrow. "I trust your injuries have been attended to, Porel." "You know they have, traitor." Several days had passed since the Order's minions had recovered her from the wrecked vehicle, along with the monstrous warrior that had seized her. Since then, she'd been confined to this room, and her questions had gone unanswered. "You are aware that your attack on my embassy will be construed as an act of war," she challenged. "You attacked us," Baal said serenely, "without provocation. I do not accept that, but I advise you to release me without delay. Perhaps an accord may be yet reached." "That is our aspiration." Baal extended her hands, palms upward. "The Cog Eternals embrace the greatest good. It has always sought an alliance with the Tau Empire." "Then release me." "As you wish. Please follow me, Porel." Adib didn't move. "You agree?" she said doubtfully. "The Animus Alpha will address your concerns," Baal assured her. "Who? He is the first architect of the cog eternal, but many of us have come to see him as a father. I believe you shall too. Adib's eyes narrowed as she spotted something lurking in the passage beyond Baal. Your pardon, Porel, Baal said. I wanted to introduce my son, Gebra. Enter, child. There is nothing to fear. A squat figure shambled in, its heavy-set form swathed in robes. Lovingly, Baal pulled its hood back and smiled at her prisoner. Adib stared aghast, struggling to make sense of the infant's face. He is but 3 Taushri, Baal groaned, but children grow so swiftly here. As the hybrid thing grinned through a veil of tendrils, Adib's composure finally unraveled, and a dark thought flashed through her mind. Perhaps the xenophobia of the Gwila is not a sickness, but a strength. Part 2. Firecast. It was never truly dark in the mire. By day, the jealous canopy of trees strangled the sunlight into a trickle, drowning the jungle in murk. By night, the swarming fungi awoke, flooding the grottos and glades with bioluminescence, transforming the morass into a pungent wonderland. It was a world of rival twilights, but still the ghosts came out at night. They bled from the tangled skein of the jungle, and hovered furtively at the edge of the clearing. There were 7, every one in emaciated shadow and rotting fatigues. In the bilious light of their khaki uniforms were a patchwork purple, and their eyes seemed to glitter with indigo fire. Crouching at the tree line, they scanned the clearing, battered las rifles flitting around warily. With a flick of the wrist, the leader then dissolved them into 2 teams, and they fanned along the perimeter. Motionless, the leader kept watch on the ruin. The rain had turned hard and heavy, battering through the vault of the jungle and raising streamers of mist, but the pale dome of the temple glowed through the murk. It was typical of the indigenous architecture. Deprived of stone, the ancient Phaedrons had carved their buildings from coral, imbuing them with globular, organic looks that were repellent to imperial eyes. The central cupola had collapsed, and the walls were honeycombed with fissures, but there was no trace of the weeds or creeper vines that preyed on the wholesome relics. A circle of barren ground radiated from the temple, holding the jungle at bay for some 10 meters or so. It was a pattern played out by a myriad dead temples across the planet. The mystery fascinated the Mechanicus priests, but to Ignatz Cabeza, it was just another sign of this world's fundamental wrongness. The sergeant was a wiry cadaver of a man, his features molded to a death mask by a paste of gray mud. His eyes gleamed in the hollows of the camouflage, irises iridescent with the bloom of glory few. But Cabeza was no degenerate. He relived most of Phaedra's fungal narcotics. But the glory was different, its spores granting that razor-wire sharpness a warrior sometimes found in the heat of battle. Of course the glory was forbidden, but deep in the mire, far from the vigilant eyes of the priests and commissars, a man made his own laws. Uneasily his thoughts drifted to Iverson, the wreck of a commissar who joined the regiment a month back. The man had presided over the remnants of the 6th Tempest, like a carrion bird shadowing a dying man. And of course the 6th was dying. The fall of Cabeza's regiment was a slow-burning shame in his heart. There were Verzanti, conquistadors of the Gallian Meridian, guardsmen of the Guard Emperor, and they had exulted in his campaign. Whipped into a fervor by Agula di Carava, the holy water dragon of the sixth tempest. They had joined the crusade to Phaedra joyfully, eager to brand their name upon his heathen world. Instead, they had drowned in its filth. How long had it been? 3 years? 4? Cararvahal himself had fallen. In the second year, raving and innocent with blood, unraveled from within by a boarfly infestation. Inevitably, the regiment had unraveled in its wake, 1,000 proud conquistadores, fading to a few hundred shadows. Tactically marginal, they had been shunted off to this worthless island, crawling with Xenos tainted savages. Dolorosa Topaz, a backwater corner of the war where victory was impossible, as it was irrelevant. And here they were forgotten, almost. Long months after that, their exile began. An imperial gunboat had appeared on the horizon. The Verzante gathered on the shore, and Velasquez, the veteran captain, who led them together by sheer force of will, dared to make a show of hope. But the boat had carried neither reinforcements nor supplies, just a scarecrow in black. There had been no mistaking the figure standing the prow of the approaching boat. Strikingly tall and straight in his leather stormcoat, his square-faced jaw shadowed by a high peaked cap. He was a commissar cut out of the classic mold. Watching him, Cabeza had shuddered. Though the Sixth had lost both his disciplinary officers long ago, they'd left him with plenty of scars to remember them by. Not that he held it against them. He'd been a rowdy dog until the commissars had whipped him into shape. Luckily, he'd been a quick learner, unlike his brother Greco, who wound up hanging by his heels in the parade ground as an example to the new recruits. After they'd all been quick learners. And Cabeza had wondered what this new tyrant would teach them. But when the commissar stepped from the boat, Cabeza had seen the truth of him. The newcomer's cap was tattered, and his leather coat was more gray than black, its edges encrusted with a rime of mold. Up close, he'd been pallid and unshaven, his gray hair hanging from well below the shoulders. He was probably no more than 45, but already old, with something that cut deeper than age. Worse still was the telltale lattice of spider vine inscribed on his face. Only a blind man, or a man too ignorant to see, could have taken such a wound. Perhaps it had happened a lifetime ago, back in the commissar's first tour of the mire, but to Cabeza the scar still marked him as a fool. Phaedra has no mercy for fools. The newcomer's faded blue eyes had skimmed the conquistadores briefly, distant, disinterested. "Iverson," he'd said. Then he'd stalked past them to claim a tint. Commissar Iverson's tenure continued as it had began. Aloof and indifferent, he had kept to his tent or wandered the jungle alone, scribbling away in his battered leather journal. Sometimes he talked to himself, or to something in the shadows only he could see, like a man possessed. And maybe he was. Cabeza had seen stranger things in his time. In case Iverson had caught the fever in his second week and hadn't left his tent since. He was just another wreck among so many. And irrelevance. Cabeza had believed it until he glimpsed the commissar watching the camp from the shadows of his tent. And recently he'd caught Iverson's fever-bright eyes looking directly at him, almost as if he knew the treachery and engets Cabeza's heart. Something battered through the foliage behind the sergeant. He scowled as the sour-sweet stench of Zuma juice hit him. Zuma! Now there was a true high road to oblivion. Exactly the kind of fool's glow that Cabeza despised. Almost as much as he despised the man who lumbered up alongside him. Cristobal Ilm had rubbed the camouflage away from his pasty face, leaving it luminous in the fungal light. "I told you to wait, senor," Cabeza hissed. "It's raining. The water was pooling in my boots." There was a strident whine to Olm's voice that set Cabeza's teeth on edge. The few he still had left. Besides, you found our objective, Sergeant. Olm stepped forward and peered in the temple. Oh yes, you've most definitely found it. I knew my faith in you hadn't been misplaced. Olm took another step forward and stumbled, his feet skittering on the rain-slick coral. Cabeza let him fall, keeping his attention on his comrades as they completed their sortie and converged across the clearing. Corporal Alvarez waved him in the all clear. No threats in the periphery of the zone. That just left the temple itself. Cabeza signaled the advance. Olm was still slithering about on the ground, whimpering as he tried to find purchase in the coral. Cabeza hauled him up with one hand, keeping his las rifle steady with the other. On your feet, senor! I don't want to lose you. Olm clutched his arm, his tone suddenly sly. No, you don't, Sergeant. You really don't. Because I'm the one they want, remember? I'm the officer here. Cabeza looked at him. The man's attempt at cunning was pathetic. Although the mire had sucked the meat out of him, Olm still looked fat. How was that even possible? Staring at the staggy sponge of a face, with its bulging eyes and delicate Zuma-stained lips, Cabeza had felt an almost physical need for violence. He hated Olm. They all did. The fat aristo was responsible for the massacre of Captain Velasquez and the other commanders. He'd been the duty officer the night when a dead-eyed native had walked into the camp with tales of a rebel supply dump. Hungry for approval, Olm had led the natives straight to the command tent, where the infiltrator had triggered the melta bomb wired in its guts. Velasquez and the other officers had died instantly, but in a twist of fate, Olm had escaped him untouched. As the only surviving officer, he had inherited command and carried the 6th Tempest to its final death spiral. That man was a travesty. Why are you looking at me like that, Sergeant? The wheedling tone was back, and Cabeza turned away before it was too late. Olm was a degenerate, but he was the one who'd made contact with the rebels. How he'd managed it was anybody's guess, though he was Cabeza's ticket out of here. Lady Justice would have sent him to wait a little longer. After all, she'd been in no hurry to claim Olm so far. Sergeant, what's wrong? I was just thinking. What a blind bitch she is, senor, Cabeza said darkly as he walked away. The others were waiting outside the temple when Cabeza arrived with Olm at his heels. The fungal light faltered just inside the portico, but the sergeant was loath to break discipline and use a torch. He hesitated, sensing the same disquiet among his men. Not much unnerved in Gat's Cabeza anymore, but by the God Emperor, he didn't want to step inside that living dead shell. He'd swept enough of the ruins this time and knew what was waiting there. The passage would bifurcate endlessly, the arterial branches twisting and turning as they burrowed deep into the tainted flesh of the island. Many men had disappeared inside the bowels of these things. Where are the Rebs? Cabeza asked. Not far, Olm said. There will be a beacon. They said it would be just inside the doorway. Olm pointed at the leering portico. When none of the others moved, he licked his lips, stepping forward, and knelt by the threshold. Hesitantly, his hands explored the broken coral underneath the lintel, finding nothing but dust. Here! They said it would be... They promised me. Pinned between the darkness ahead and the hard eyes behind, Olm became agitated, then frantic, scrabbling through the detritus, reaching deeper until... Yes! Yes, here it is! Olm glanced over his shoulder, smiling with relief. Something bright was clutched in his spongy hand. Awoken by its touch, it emitted a soft, rhythmic pulse. Cabeza looked up. Maybe it was a subtle disturbance of the light that drew his eyes, or maybe it was pure instinct. Either way, he saw the shape unfolding on the lintel high above. It was just a swath of shadows against the pale dome, but it turned his guts to ice. Wired on the glory, Cabeza hurled himself backwards, firing up on full auto before his conscious mind had caught up. As his violet fire ripped skyward, the thing reared up and leapt from his perch. The las beam stitched contrails of steam through the rain as they chased the bat-like shape. And then the beast was amongst them, like a black whirlwind. Two men went down instantly, slammed to the ground by the force of its leap, and cushioning its landing. The attacker teetered, almost losing balance, as it struck out again. There was a sharp crackle, and a third man toppled. Already the thing was spinning around towards Alvarez. Too close to fire, the conquistador swung out with the butt of his rifle, but something hard and unbending blocked the bow. Again the crackle, and then Alvarez was roaring in agony, his rifle slipping from nerveless fingers. His scream was cut short by the brutal jab to his throat, and he knelt, jerking about in violent spasms, and the thing spun next to him. Staggering backwards, Capesa tried to get a bead on its jagged, graceless dance, but the attacker was woven too deeply among his men. He understood its game, outnumbered and outgunned, as it had gambled on surprise and shock. Shock! Abruptly, he saw the mythic flush of the narcotic fugue, and recognized the baton in the attacker's hand, then recognized the raw electric crackle as Estrada collapsed in a twitching heap. Shockmaw! And then the whirlwind swung to face him. Capesa finally recognized it. "Iverson!" he said. The commissar had lost his cap, and there was a smoldering tear in his coat where Cabeza's las fire had clipped his shoulder. He was swaying and breathless, the spider vine scars livid amongst the chalk white face. His eyes were burning with fever, and something more. Seeing the indigo fire in his pupils, Capesa spat. "What the hell kind of commissar are you anyways?" "The wrong kind," Iverson said. He smiled bleakly, his scars twisting into a strange new geometry. And then Cabeza was shouldering his las rifle, and Iverson was loping towards him, one leg twisted and trailing, probably messed up by the jump. And Cabeza's finger was tightening on the trigger, and Iverson was hurtling to Shockmaw. Time snapped back into shape, and Cabeza's world exploded into pain. The Shockmaw smashed the rifle from his hands, and a split second later Iverson barreled into his chest and threw him to his feet. He landed hard, and the commissar crashed down on top of him, grinding him into the sharp coral. Iverson's fists pummeled down as his mad eyes bored into Cabeza. "She won't have your soul," the commissar hissed through ragged breaths. "I won't let you fall." Finally the deserter lay still, and Iverson lurched to his feet, stumbling as he retrieved the shockmaw. He could feel his stomach convulsing with the fungal filth he'd consumed. But there had been no other way to ride out the fever. It was just another small heresy to add to his growing tally. Old Bierce would be turning in his grave, if he hadn't already clawed his way out to haunt his protege. "But I've done my duty. I've hauled them back from the brink. I'll take you back, all of you," Iverson mumbled, as he counted up the scattered semi-conscious bodies. He wasn't sure how he'd managed that part of his plan yet. 7 broken men to carry back to camp. 7? Where was the 8th? He turned to the temple and saw Olin crouched at the threshold. The noble's eyes were wide with terror. Iverson felt bile rising in his throat at the sight of him. Yes, this was the 8th turncoat, the worm, the one who'd sown the seeds of corruption amongst the rest. For this one, there would be no second chance. Iverson drew his las pistol and leveled it at the cowering noble. "You'll be number 28, he realized. Maybe your death will exercise number 27. Number 27. Iverson saw her then, standing in the shadowed portico behind the fat man, watching him intently with her 3 dead eyes, waiting to see him kill again. "For the Emperor," Iverson told her, trying to conceal the edge in his voice. Something darted from the trees behind him, buzzing like an angry insect. Iverson spun around, firing, but the sleek white saucer, streaking towards him, zipped between his las shots. skimming high above the ground to an anti-gravity field. The disc was only about a meter in diameter, but Iverson knew that a soulless intelligence guided the machine. It was only a drone, its artificial brain no more sophisticated than a jungle predator, but the very existence of such a thing was blasphemous. Blue skin technology is a heresy upon the face of the galaxy. Of more immediate concern were the twin pulse carbines mounted on the other side of the drone. As the disc whirled to dodge his fire, those guns rotated independently to lock onto him. He dived aside as they span on a sputtering field of plasma. The dive slipped into a fall, saving him from a second burst as the machine whizzed by. He rolled over and fired after it, catching it with a couple of rounds as it banked into a turn. His shots only mottled its carapace. Chattering angrily, the drone soared back towards him, a hail of las bolts spattering the machine from the side, knocking it off kilter and exposing its vulnerable underbelly. Careening wildly through the air, the drone raked the ground with plasma, shredding two of the unconscious conquistadors. Someone roared in fury, and fresh las fire ripped into the saucer's belly. One of the carbines exploded, taking the other with it, and spinning the machine out of control. Gushing smoke and burbling in distress, it retreated, losing altitude as it limped towards the trees. But Iverson was already on his feet and charging. Leaping, he swung the shock maul down on the drone, smashing it downwards to the ground. It tried to rise, and he struck again and again, elevated by a hatred, untainted by doubt. The machine exploded. Iverson was thrown from his feet, falling for what felt like forever, watching a ragged arm spiraling towards the sky, as his hand still clenched the shock maul. It was awful and absurd, but suddenly he was laughing, and someone else was laughing along with him. He glanced along the clearing and saw Cabeza. The cadaverous conquistador was on his knees, cackling through a mask of mud and blood. His las rifle was leveled at the wretched drone. Cabeza didn't know why he'd thrown in with the commissar at the end. He'd already turned his back on the Imperium to sign up with the enemy in the hope of a better deal. He wouldn't be the first guardsman to do it, nor the last, so why make a bad move now? What could Iverson offer him except more pain, and maybe a quick death? Even for a commissar, the man was crazy. Look at him, lying there with his arm torn off at the elbow, and laughing like it was the best damn joke in the Imperium. Crazy. Except Cabeza was laughing right along with him, so maybe he was crazy too. Maybe that was all there was to it. For the bloody God Emperor! Cabeza crackled to the last of his broken teeth. The drone soared down behind him, and his chest erupted in a superheated geyser of flesh and blood. Looking down at the sizzling cavity of his chest, he frowned, thinking a full-grown mireworm could swim through it right now. It was a miracle his torso was holding things together. But then it wasn't. Collapsed like a slaughterhouse. The second drone flashed by, homing in on Iverson. Biting down on the sudden agony of his ruined arm, he rolled to his knees. His las pistol was gone, lost somewhere in the fall. He wouldn't have stopped the machine, but it would have given him a stand. Hadn't Bierce taught him that a stand was all that mattered in the final accounting? But hadn't he stopped believing that long ago? If he had stopped believing it, why was he still fighting? Maybe because Bierce was standing at the edge of the clearing, hands clasped behind his back in that parade ground vigor, watching and judging his pupil until the bitter end. The drone swept past and began to circle him, chattering and chirping as two more descended to join its dance. The machines seemed to grow more alert and aware in numbers, almost as if they were parts of a collective mind coming together. Maybe it was just a delusion, but Iverson could have sworn that there was real anger in that mind. He destroyed one of its components and it wanted revenge. And so the drones were playing with him, enjoying his hopeless one-armed struggle against the coral, mocking his determination to die on his feet. He could almost taste their hatred. Wasn't that why the Imperium shunned such technology? Didn't the ecclesiarchy preach that thinking machines loathed the living and would ultimately turn on their creators? Mankind had learned that hard truth long ago, but the blue skin race was still reckless with youth. Perhaps that would be its downfall. As the drones circled him, Iverson took comfort in that thought. The machine chatter rose to a higher pitch, and he steeled himself for death. But abruptly the drones fell silent and drifted back a few paces. To Iverson's eyes, they looked reluctant and sullen, like angry dogs leashed by their masters. And as the dogs withdrew, their masters emerged. They crept to the trees in a low crouch, their stubby carbines sweeping from side to side as they advanced, hugging the coral with a bone-deep distrust of open ground. There were 5, lightly armored mottled black breastplates and rubberized fatigues. Their helmets arced over their shoulders, giving them a vaguely crustacean look. The strangeness, heightened by the crystal sensors, embedded in their own otherwise blank faceplates. Iverson recognized them at once. Pathfinders, the scouts of the Tau race. Despite the hunched postures, the warriors were swift and graceful, fanning out to surround him with a perfect coordination of bonded hunters. Slipping on the coral yet again, Iverson abandoned dignity and faced them on his knees. He could see Bierce lurking in the periphery of his vision, demanding some final caustic rhetoric from his protege, but Iverson had nothing to say. Glaring at the Pathfinders, he noticed one of them was quite different to his companions, shorter and slighter of build. The set of its shoulders subtly wrong. The only one with hooves. Iverson's eyes narrowed as the truth hit him. The odd one out was a genuine article. Under that loathsome Xenos armor, all the others are human. The lone alien stepped forward and dropped to its haunches, bringing its massive crystal lenses level with his face. There was a crimson slash running along the spine of its helmet, identifying it as the leader, but Iverson was drawn to another mark, a deep crack running from its crown to the chin of his breastplate. The damage had been patched up, but the rippled scar of a chainsword was unmistakable to the commissar. "Your face," he breathed. "Show me. Or are you afraid?" "Be silent, Chassoy." It was one of the traitors. "This is one of the commissar caste. Even wounded, he will not yield." The studied formality of the traitor's words disgusted Iverson, particularly the way he'd spoken the unclean Xenos rank, Chassoy, with such reverence. These traitors weren't just mercenaries or cowards looking for a way out. They were true believers. The Chassoy considered Iverson for a moment. Then it began to unclip its helmet, its 4-fingered hands nimble, as they uncoupled the power feed and flickered an array of seals. Throughout the ritual, its cluster of crystal eyes remained fixed on him, unwavering until the helmet was swept away and he saw the face of his enemy. Even for an alien, it was ugly. Its leathery blue skin was tinged with yellow and pockmarked with insect bites. A rash of boils ran from its neck to cluster around a top knot of greasy black hair. But its most startling feature was the ruination of its left eye by the chainsword. A deep rift had been carved in the side of its face, running from scalp to jaw, mirroring the crack in his helmet. It was an old wound, but still hideous. A bionic sensor glittered from the scabrous mess where its eye had been, and the whole jaw had been replaced with a carved prosthetic. The remaining eye, black and lusterless, regarded the commissar inscrutably. For all its mutilated strangeness, the creature was recognizably female. She was the first Tau Iverson had seen up close, and whatever he'd expected, it wasn't this filthy, disfigured veteran. "You're even uglier than me!" It was such an absurd, irrelevant thought that he almost laughed out loud. "Commissar!" The word sounded unfamiliar on the creature's lips, but he sensed it. It had faced his kind before, and had the scar to show for it. "Commissar!" It was an accusation ripe with hatred. "Once and forever," Iverson answered, denying the lie and refusing to meet Bierce's gaze. The old raven was standing amongst the traitors now, his thirst for judgment blinding him from the irony. High above, the sky rumbled, pregnant with the storm, and the Medaid's chaise shuffled up beside Bierce, haggard with his curse. A moment later, lightning lashed the canopy into an emerald fire, and there was a knife in the alien's hand, tearing towards Iverson's eye. Eye for an eye, flashing, so bright and swift. But don't the blueskins despise close combat? There was a new pain as the blade impaled the hand he'd thrown up to ward off the blow. Not this blueskin. It wants to taste my pain, share its pain. A stabbing agony as the blade punched